This is not going to be about something popular, you might even call it kinda niche, but I don't care. I was a history fan long before I became a more serious fan of anything else, and this channel is a reflection of whatever occupies the most intimate depths of my soul. And I hope you stay. I hope I can kindle in you the spark of loving history as much as I do, because human history is absolutely fascinating. The drama, the horrors, and the triumphs of the people who are now long dead are more complex and fascinating than almost anything I've read or seen in fiction. There are cases in real history that you just read about and think that they sound so freaking insane that were you to sit down and try to come up with something by yourself for a fictional book, you'd never be able to come up with something that crazy. So yeah, whether you are or are not fascinated by history, I hope you stay with me for this video, and I hope I can spark the interest in you to go and research this topic, because it's absolutely worth it. Now, the video is a quick evaluation of a film that came out recently called Firebrand, and it's a film about the last wife of the infamous Henry VIII. You know, that disgusting fatso king of England from the 16th century who was famous for killing his wives? Yeah, that one. The film Firebrand is about his last wife, called Katherine Parr, who history remembers as the wife who survived, albeit barely, and just because Henry VIII died before he could execute her. Now, at this point, you can obviously figure out my opinion on the film by the title, but before I get into that, let me give you some context as to why this means so much to me, why I'm so fascinated by this time period, and why I'm so enamored with this one woman from 5 centuries ago, Katherine Parr. So look at the world around you, as it is now, and then look at your calendar, and imagine that the numbers of the year 2024 start to roll back. Slowly at first, like 2023, 2020, then 10, then 90, then faster and faster, 1890, 1730, 1600, until finally, the calendar stops at 1543, and you've turned up in London. It's a world without electronics, without industry, without things like modern science or medicine, without even central heating and running water. There's no such thing as instant messaging or hot drinks or human rights, and the ways in which the world is divided is entirely different than ours. Our modern Western world is primarily divided on a political basis, where either Republicans or Democrats, liberals or conservatives, socialists or capitalists. But the world division of 1543 is entirely different. Its division basis is not politics or economy, instead it's spirituality. Up until the beginning of 16th century Europe, Rome and the Catholic Church had been the main engine of the West, forming the so-called realm of Christendom. And then, at the beginning of the 16th century, the world of Christendom was shook from within, as its ancient wheels began to finally wobble and fall apart on the road to modernity. It started with a famous asshole called Martin Luther, who proclaimed the old system was broken and corrupt, and from him sprang a storm that overtook the whole of Europe, the opposition to Catholicism, named Protestantism, and the Reformation. And before you think how all this sounds boring and generic textbook crap, you should remember, these are not just some names of movements and some obscure terms for nerds. People died over this in the thousands. As the world shakes and its tremors cause death today, so it did back then. And the Reformation and collapse of Catholic Europe was one of these major tremors. During the transition of the two movements, people were beheaded, they were burned, they were gutted alive. Men, women, and children were slaughtered by the thousands across city streets, just because their idea of God differed from that of other people. To us nowadays, this might sound insane, and yet this is real history. And it actually happened, and not so long ago. In the big scheme of things, 5 centuries' time is as significant as a mosquito's part. And so it is 1543, the Reformation is sweeping across Europe, and in England, Henry VIII sits on the throne. He has only 4 years left to live, and he is married to his final wife, Katherine Parr. Before her, he had 5 other wives. The first one he was married to for more than 20 years, and throughout their marriage, they were both Catholic. But then, she could not give him a male heir, and so he wanted to divorce her and marry again. And because they were Catholic, they couldn't divorce. So Henry cut off his ties with Catholicism, and thus let the Reformation pour into England. and he banished his first wife to die alone and isolated. He then married again, expecting to this time finally acquire an heir, which his second wife also did not manage to produce, and so he fucking cut her head off, and married a third time. Now, his third wife did give him a son, but then she died after she gave birth. He then marries a fourth wife, and a short while after, they separated, supposedly because he found her ugly. He then married his fifth wife, a teenager, while he himself was already like 50 years old, and a short while later, he found out his teenage wife had had boyfriends before he married her, so he had his teenage wife beheaded. And it is then that we come to his final wife, Katherine Parr. She arrives into this hellhole of a situation, about 30 years old, and just because the king notices her and likes her, she has to marry that disgusting old tub of lard, who is at that point immensely fat, exceedingly moody and aggressive, and afflicted by a disgusting wound on his leg that is constantly soring and leaking pus. And, maybe worst of all, as most men of the 16th century, Henry VIII is a man who thinks it's not a woman's job to have a brain. Man is the head of woman, as St. Paul infamously says in the Bible, and Catherine, unfortunately, was an intellectual. She was the first Queen of England to publish books under her own real name. And I've read one of her books, which was fascinating but also kind of painful, because it was like 100 pages of religious self-flagellation. Anyway, she had an intellect, and liked to use it, to the offense of 16th century men. And she was originally Catholic, but then, around the time she married the king, she had an epiphany, and gradually became a fervent reformist. She started promoting Protestant books and groups. She was secretly colluding to strengthen Protestantism within the country, because like all Protestants, she didn't believe that you need mediation in the form of a priest to be able to communicate with God. The Catholic Church and the Pope were only pretenders who put a monopoly on connection to the heavens. And the Protestants, Catherine included, thought, oh yeah, well fuck you. I don't need you to be able to tell me what God thinks and says. I'll get myself the scripture, I'm gonna have it translated from Latin into English, I'm gonna read it myself, and I'll interpret it for myself, and I'm gonna connect to God on my own. My God is personal. My God is within me. He speaks to me, and I speak to him. And I don't need you to fucking tell me whatever it is you think that he thinks. No one gave the Catholic Church the authority that it professes. And neither is anything like this mentioned in the Bible, so as far as we Protestants are concerned, you can take your priests and shove them. And I myself am an atheist, but I think this is so beautiful. The people of the 16th century realizing that divinity and higher being is not institutional, but instead it's personal. You can find higher being and higher meaning not by looking outwards and listening to others. You can find it by looking inward and listening to your own voice and intuition, and basing your personal pillar of belief on whatever gives you the strength and will to keep living and fighting. And I think this is so fascinating. Looking at it from a modern perspective, it kind of looks like primitive leaps toward modern psychology, but I'll stop here because this is just my own insane fantasy suppositions. In any case, Catherine did experience this epiphany, and she nearly died because of it. Because at the time, the court of Henry VIII was neither Catholic nor Protestant, but somewhere in the middle. Because the king did not want the Pope to have authority over him, he broke up with Rome. But then, this was the only part of Catholicism that he didn't like. All the rest, he relished in it. He kept the Catholic philosophy and proceedings of the court. He actually proclaimed himself to be the Pope in England, holding church authority over all of his subjects. And he thought that the Protestants of the Reformed movement were all heretics. Because when the Reformists said that you don't need to have mediators to connect with God, they also kind of implied that this included kings. The kings thought themselves anointed by God, chosen by God, and so in a way, mouthpieces of God on earth, similar to the Pope. And so there was a very, very delicate, if any, difference in the Protestants saying fuck you to the Pope or fuck you to the king, which was ultimate heresy, and heretics were burned at the stake. Catherine knew of this danger, and yet she was so fervent in her beliefs that she took the risk anyway. And this makes me love her because we, as modern people, how many of us would be as brave as she was? Putting your life on the line for something that you believe in? A more pragmatic person might call this stubborn stupidity, But this is why such times and people fascinate me so much. There's a very narrow difference between stubborn stupidity and holding on to your beliefs to your last breath, proving the honesty and sincerity of your individuality. People like Katherine Parr, like Thomas More or Bishop Fisher, and like all religious martyrs throughout the ages. On the one hand, you think, if it were me, I'd just choose to comply and survive. But on the other hand, you think, I wish I had their balls and resilience in the face of such horrors. And so Katherine chose to take the risk, and nearly lost her life for it. Some of her close friends did. Anne Askew, a friend to the Queen and a fervent preacher against Catholic authority, was arrested, then tortured so much that at the end she couldn't use her legs because they were broken into pieces. Finally, they had to wheelchair her for her execution by burning, and at the stake, she was blown up with gunpowder so that she doesn't have to suffer that long. Just imagine going through that because of the kind of God you believed in. Then Katherine was plotted against by the king's ministers who were conservative. They organized a search of her servants and inventory to look for heretical contents, and then the king, her husband, signed her arrest warrant. It was a matter of 1 or 2 days before she was taken to prison and later executed, maybe even without a trial. And the only thing that saved her was that the rumor reached her of the king having signed her arrest warrant. She then ran to him, while there was still the possibility of her talking to him in person at all, fell to her knees, and basically told him everything he wanted to hear from a woman. That she was wrong and stupid, that she never should have thought of herself speaking up. And that as a woman, she only wanted his help to help her understand God and the scriptures. She wanted him to teach her and instruct her, so that she can be learned and obedient only to the extent that a wife should be to her husband. And that saved her. Because, as Ann Coulter said about Donald Trump, he is like a couch cushion. He bears the impression of the last person that sat on him. Henry VIII was the absolute same stupid ass. And he forgave her, just as the guards came to arrest her right there in front of the king, and he waved them away. If there is a historical definition of a narrow escape, that's fucking it. Katherine went through that. And then when we think the worst has passed, Henry VIII finally dies, and Katherine is free to do whatever the fuck she wants, what does she do? The poor thing marries for love. And later on, the man she loves and marries turns out to be a cheater and a child molester, and later dies on the block for conspiracy. Katherine, to everyone's amazement, gets pregnant by him, and then dies in childbirth at the age of just 36 years old. And I wish that was the end of her story, but no, she also has some insane post-mortem adventures. They bury her in their chapel at her home, then in the following centuries, her grave gets lost, then rediscovered, then opened in the 18th century, her body taken out, thrown in the trash by some drunken idiots, hair and teeth stolen from her, then reburied in a shitty way, then taken out again, and then reburied in a restored church and tomb, where she finally rests in peace today. And I hope it stays this way. So this is, in very, very general terms, the story of Queen Katherine Parr, and why she fascinates me so much. And that is also the reason why I got so excited when I heard they were making this movie, about her specifically, because she absolutely deserves it. There have been all these films before, focusing so much more on the other wives of Henry VIII, and Katherine Parr was mostly just brushed off as the one who survived. Well, in reality, yeah, she kinda survived, but also, she went through fucking hell. I'd argue that she has the second most interesting story of all the wives after Anne Boleyn. And then the movie was announced and held off for a long time. I've no idea why, maybe COVID or something, but it gave me historical blue balls for like 2 years or something. And now it has finally come out and I watched it. And oh my god, it happened again. My little nerdy heart has once again been shattered. Spoilers for the film if you haven't seen it, but if you ask me, just don't. Don't watch it. If you admire Katherine Parr, just do her a favor and don't watch this. Because it very much follows this current trend of expressing feminism through torture porn. Oh, women were so unfairly treated through the ages that we have to show it to people in the grossest way possible. Otherwise they probably wouldn't appreciate it because they're stupid. We have to show it to them very explicitly. It's the same thing that happens to Marilyn Monroe with that horrible film Blonde. Was I aware of the fact that in 1950s Hollywood, if you were a woman and you wanted to be successful, you had to suck dick? Of course I was. Who the hell didn't know it? But did I have to see that in a fucking biographical film? No, are you kidding me? I know Marilyn Monroe had a difficult life, but I didn't want to watch her get beaten or raped, or sucking JFK's dick. And I'm pretty sure Marilyn would never ever want people to watch her suck dicks on screen. What the hell is wrong with you? And now they did the same thing to Katherine Parr. This movie makes us watch multiple times how she has to have sex with a disgusting, fat, abusive son of a bitch whose infected leg wound oozes pus all the time, flies buzzing around it and everything, and they literally make these scenes follow one another. We get a shot of the oozing leg, then right after, they show the sex. Precisely because they want to drive home this point of it being physically disgusting. And I ask again, why? Did you think me too stupid to assume that she had to have sex with that disgusting fuck? Did you think you have to show me? Because otherwise I wouldn't have known what she went through? Fuck you, and fuck this film. Oh, and not to mention all the historical inaccuracy. This film just takes it to a whole other level. It shows Katherine going through miscarriage. No, she didn't. It shows her being thrown in prison. No, she wasn't. And then it shows her killing the king in the end. No, she fucking didn't. I just have one question to ask the filmmakers. Why did you go through all this trouble, recreating so meticulously the fashion of the period, the interior design? All of it was done so beautifully, surpassing all Tudor films I've seen so far. And then you went ahead and shat on the actual history of the events? Why did you bother to have then the visual historical accuracy in the first place? That's like making a cake out of shit and then covering it in chocolate so that nobody sees the shit underneath. I'm just trying to figure out the line of thinking here, because I honestly can't with these people. It's like they started making 2001: A Space Odyssey, but then midway they switched to Ancient Aliens. Why are you so allergic to depicting history as it was? History is already immensely fascinating. You don't need to make it more attractive for viewers. What the hell is wrong with you? Just fuck you, fuck this film, fuck everyone involved in dishonoring Katherine Parr in this disgusting way.